I need to see some identification. Now.
I'm standing on my own front porch. Why would I need to show you identification?
We received a call about a possible break-in at this address.
A break-in? Let me guess. Someone saw a black woman and assumed I was committing a crime.
Maybe. Now show me your ID and we can...
It was 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday night in Charlotte, North Carolina, when a police officer answering a suspicious person report had just made the biggest error of his professional life. The encounter would end his employment, cost his department more than $300,000, and turn into a nationwide example of racial profiling and Fourth Amendment violations. The bodycam footage would later be shown in courtrooms, police academies, and civil rights workshops across America. What Officer Ethan Caldwell didn't realize as he arrived at the home on Elwood Avenue was that the woman on the porch was not an ordinary homeowner. She was Judge Simone Garrett, age 41, a circuit court judge who handled criminal trials, including cases involving police abuse. She had sentenced officers for using excessive force. She had suppressed evidence from unlawful searches. She had publicly reminded prosecutors to honor constitutional protections. And she had been stopped, questioned, and bothered by police in her own neighborhood so often over the past 5 years that she understood her rights better than most attorneys. Not only because she learned them in law school, though she did, but because she had been forced to defend them again and again just to live her everyday life. Before we continue this story, tell us where you're watching from. Share your country or state in the comments below. And if you believe no one should have to justify living in their own home, hit the subscribe button now. You won't expect what happens next. Seriously, subscribe right now. Simone Garrett did not come from money. She was raised in West Charlotte in a community where police meant intimidation, not safety. She watched her father get pulled over 3 times in a single month on his way to work as a high school principal. She saw her brother placed in handcuffs on their own front lawn because he fit a description. She had store employees trail her through aisles starting at age 15. But Simone was exceptional, earning straight A's in high school, a full ride to Duke University, and graduating at the top of her class from UNCC School of Law. She clerked for a federal judge, worked as a prosecutor for 5 years, then spent 3 more as a defense attorney. At 38, she was appointed to the circuit court, making her one of the youngest judges in North Carolina's history. She earned $140,000 annually. She owned a stunning 4-bedroom home in Myers Park, one of Charlotte's wealthiest neighborhoods. She drove a BMW. She had a vacation house in Asheville. Everything she had, she earned. She had the respect of fellow judges, the attorneys in her courtroom, and the public she served. But none of that mattered when someone saw her black skin and decided she didn't belong. This wasn't new. 3 years earlier, she was stopped while jogging in her own neighborhood after a resident called police about someone suspicious. 2 years ago, private security questioned her while she entered her downtown building because they didn't believe she was a judge. Last year, an officer pulled her over in her own driveway, claiming her car looked out of place. Every time she filed complaints. Every time nothing changed. Officers got a warning, maybe attended bias training, and then returned to doing exactly the same thing. But Simone took lessons from every stop. She learned that keeping her composure was essential. She learned that calmly stating her rights worked better than debating. She learned that body cameras protected her, not the officer. And she learned that many officers hesitated once they realized she truly understood the law. That Thursday evening, Simone had just returned from the gym. She was exhausted, sweaty, and ready for a glass of wine and some Netflix. She pulled into her driveway at 6:43 p.m., grabbed her gym bag from the passenger seat, and walked toward her front door. She stood on the porch, key in her hand, seconds away from unlocking the door when she heard a voice behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am." Simone closed her eyes briefly. She recognized that tone instantly. She turned and saw a police officer stepping out of his patrol car, parked along the curb in front of her house. Officer Ethan Caldwell was 29 years old and had served with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department for 6 years. He was Latino, and he believed that fact alone meant he couldn't be racist, a belief that would collapse very quickly. "Can I help you, officer?" Simone asked evenly. "We got a call about a possible break-in at this address," Caldwell said as he approached the porch. "I need to see some identification." Simone stayed still. "A break-in," she repeated. "At my house. Ma'am, I just need to confirm you live here." "I'm on my porch holding my own key," Simone said. "What exactly here suggests a burglary?" Caldwell's hand drifted toward his belt. "The caller reported someone trying to enter the home. I have to clear the call. ID." "Officer, let me be very clear. I am on my property. I have broken no law. You do not have reasonable suspicion to detain me, and you do not have the right to demand my identification. Being a black woman in a wealthy neighborhood is not reasonable suspicion." Maybe it is, Caldwell said, the words slipping out before he could stop himself. Now show me your ID and we can end this. The body camera caught everything, those 3 words. Maybe it is. A clear admission on camera that race was the reason for the stop, that he understood the call was racist and chose to enforce it anyway. Simone laughed softly, bitterly. You just admitted on camera that this stop is racial profiling. You know this call was racist and you're still acting on it. That's not policing, officer, that's participation. I'm just doing my job, Caldwell replied, his tone turning sharp. Your duty is to protect the Constitution, Simone responded. Right now you're breaking it. You answered a call. You can plainly see that I belong here. I have a key. I'm standing on my own porch. There's no shattered glass, no forced entry, no evidence of any crime at all. Whatever reasonable suspicion you may have thought you had no longer exists. You need to leave. I need to see identification, Caldwell repeated. No, Simone said calmly. The word lingered between them. On the bodycam footage, you can watch Caldwell's stance change. He leans forward. His jaw tightens. Ma'am, if you refuse to show ID, I will detain you. Based on what? Simone asked. State your reasonable suspicion. What specific articulable facts suggest I committed a crime? You're not cooperating with a police investigation. There is no investigation, Simone said. There's a racist neighbor who reported a black woman for simply existing. And there's you violating my Fourth Amendment rights by demanding ID without legal cause. Those are not the same thing. Caldwell stepped closer to the porch. Ma'am, this is your final warning. And this is yours, Simone replied, her voice steady but firm underneath. You need to leave my property immediately or I will file a formal complaint and pursue every legal option available for this violation of my rights. You're not in a position to threaten me, Caldwell said. I'm not threatening you, Simone answered. I'm explaining the consequences of your choices. And officer, I am Judge Simone Garrett of the 16th Judicial Circuit. I handle criminal cases in this county, including police misconduct cases. So when I tell you that you are violating the Fourth Amendment, I'm not guessing. I know exactly what I'm saying. Quick question for those watching. How many times do you think Judge Garrett has been profiled in her own neighborhood? Leave your guess in the comments. The bodycam captures the exact second Caldwell's expression changes. The confidence disappears. His eyes widen just a bit. You can see him realizing he's made a massive mistake. You're Judge Garrett, he asked, his voice suddenly unsure. That's what I just said. Caldwell began, then stopped. He glanced at his notepad, then back at Simone. I was just responding to a call. And you did, Simone said. And now you're leaving. Unless you have a warrant or exigent circumstances, which you don't, you have no legal right to be on my property or to demand my ID. Do you understand? Caldwell stepped back. I was just doing my job, he said again, but the authority was gone. If this is how you do your job, Simone said, then you're doing it wrong. You made race-based assumptions. You demanded identification without legal authority. You threatened detention when I asserted my rights. Every bit of that is on your body camera. Every bit of it violates the Fourth Amendment. Ma'am, don't apologize to me, Simone cut in. Fix the issue. Learn the law. Except that black people have the same constitutional rights as everyone else, even in wealthy neighborhoods, especially in wealthy neighborhoods. And when someone tells you they know their rights, listen instead of escalating. Caldwell nodded slowly, then turned and walked back to his patrol car. He sat inside for a moment, hands gripping the wheel, then drove off. Simone stayed on her porch and watched him leave. Then she pulled out her phone and took 3 steps. First, she texted her husband, who was away on business. Had another police encounter. I'm okay. Filing a complaint tomorrow. Second, she called her neighbor, an elderly white woman named Margaret, who had lived next door for 3 decades. Margaret, did you see who called the police on me today? Margaret's voice was clear. Oh, honey, yes, it was that new couple 2 houses down. I saw them watching you from their window. Then the husband grabbed his phone. I was about to come tell them you live there, but the police arrived so fast. Thank you for telling me, Simone said. I appreciate you. Third, she contacted CMPD's non-emergency line and requested a formal complaint packet and all body camera footage from the incident. The dispatcher's voice stayed polite and detached. May I have the officer's name and badge number? Officer Caldwell, badge number 5847, Simone said. She had made a point to note it while he stood on her lawn. And your name? Judge Simone Garrett, Simone replied, hearing a brief pause before the dispatcher returned, her tone slightly higher. Yes, ma'am, we'll have everything ready for you tomorrow. Simone finally went inside, unlocking the door she had tried to open nearly 20 minutes earlier. She poured that glass of wine. She sat at her kitchen table and began to write. What she created was not a simple complaint. It was a detailed legal brief outlining every constitutional violation that occurred during the encounter. She quoted Terry v. Ohio on reasonable suspicion. She cited precedent on racial profiling. She referenced CMPD's own policies regarding ID requests, and she did one more thing. She requested Ring doorbell footage from her neighbors. The couple who called police had a Ring camera capturing their yard and part of Simone's driveway. Under North Carolina law, she was entitled to any footage showing her. When it arrived 2 days later, it was devastating. It showed Simone pulling into her driveway, stepping out of her car with a gym bag and walking to her front door. It showed the neighbor, a white man in his 30s, watching from his window. It showed him pull out his phone with audio. "I don't recognize her. She's definitely trying to break in. I'm calling the cops." His wife replied, "Are you sure? Maybe she lives there." He answered, "Not in this neighborhood. Trust me." 4 words, "not in this neighborhood," 4 words that explained exactly why the call was made. Simone submitted her complaint to CMPD Internal Affairs Friday morning, just 18 hours after the encounter. She attached the body cam footage, the Ring video, and her 12-page legal analysis. She also sent copies to the NAACP, the ACLU, and a local civil rights attorney named James Richardson, who had sued CMPD successfully 3 times for racial profiling. The complaint landed on the desk of Captain Andrea Hayes, an internal affairs officer with 8 years in the unit. When she saw Judge Garrett's name, she knew immediately this would be serious. When she watched the body cam, she knew it would be a disaster. Hayes pulled Caldwell's personnel file. 6 years on the force. No prior complaints. A clean record on paper. But when she reviewed his stop data, a pattern emerged. Over the past 2 years, Caldwell initiated 87 stops or welfare checks in affluent neighborhoods. Of those, 71 involved people of color. That was an 82% rate in areas where minorities made up less than 15% of residents. Once examined, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Hayes summoned Caldwell to her office Monday morning, 4 days after the incident. She skipped the small talk entirely. "Officer Caldwell," she said, "tell me what happened on Elmwood Avenue Thursday night." Caldwell shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I responded to a call about a possible break-in. When I got there, a woman was on the porch. I asked for identification to confirm she lived there." "And did she provide ID?" "No, she refused." "Why do you believe she refused?" "She said I was violating her rights," Caldwell answered. "She said I didn't have reasonable suspicion." "Did you have reasonable suspicion?" The silence stretched too long. "I was responding to a call," Caldwell finally said. "That's not the same thing," Hayes responded. "The call allowed you to check the situation, but once you saw someone with a key on their own porch with no signs of forced entry or criminal activity, did you have specific articulable facts indicating a crime?" "She wouldn't show ID," Caldwell said. "That's suspicious." "Or," Hayes replied, "she was exercising her Fourth Amendment rights, which she is legally allowed to do, especially someone who happens to be a circuit court judge." "I didn't know she was a judge," Caldwell argued. "That's irrelevant," Hayes said sharply. "She shouldn't need to be a judge for her rights to be respected. Now answer this. Do you honestly believe you would have demanded ID from a white woman standing on that same porch holding a key?" Caldwell's face turned red. Yes, I would have." "Would you?" Hayes asked as she opened a folder on her desk. "Because I reviewed your stop data. Over the last 2 years, you initiated 87 stops in affluent neighborhoods. 82% of those involved people of color in areas that are 85% white. Can you explain that?" Caldwell said nothing. "And here's what makes this especially damaging," Hayes continued. "On your body camera, when Judge Garrett told you that being a black woman in a wealthy neighborhood doesn't create reasonable suspicion, you said, and I quote, 'Maybe it does.' You admitted on camera that you knew race was the basis of the stop. You recognized the bias and continued anyway. Do you understand how that will play in court?" Caldwell's face drained of color. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" Hayes asked. "Because there's no other interpretation." "Maybe it does" is not lawful suspicion. That was a confession, officer, in your own words on video. Hayes leaned forward. "Judge Garrett's complaint is thorough, legally sound, and supported by clear video evidence, including your admission that race played a role. She has the knowledge, the resources, and the drive to pursue this fully. This department will be sued. We will likely lose or settle for a large sum, and your career is almost certainly finished." She paused. "And beyond that, your stop history shows a pattern consistent with racial profiling. You responded to a racist call by targeting a black woman who was clearly doing nothing wrong. When she asserted her rights, you threatened detention. That's not law enforcement. That's harassment with a badge. The interview lasted 52 minutes. By the end, Caldwell had no explanation that didn't point to either ignorance or bias. Hayes suspended him pending the investigation's outcome. But Judge Garrett wasn't waiting. She hired James Richardson, the civil rights attorney, and filed a federal lawsuit 3 weeks after the incident. The suit ran 38 pages and alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment, violations of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and a pattern and practice of racial profiling by CMPD. She wasn't only suing Caldwell. She was suing the department for failing to identify and correct clear behavioral patterns among its officers. The lawsuit included the Ring doorbell footage capturing the neighbor's "not in this neighborhood" remark. It included Caldwell's stop statistics showing the 82% rate. It included body camera footage from the encounter with Caldwell's "maybe it does" statement highlighted and fully transcribed. Those 3 words became the core of the case, proof that the officer knew the stop was racially driven and continued anyway. It was crushing. CMPD's attorneys reviewed the filing and the evidence and gave the police chief the same advice given in cases like this. Settle quickly. Because if this reached trial, a jury would hear a police officer admit on camera that being black in a wealthy neighborhood maybe creates reasonable suspicion. Statements like that lose cases and cost millions. The negotiations lasted 8 weeks. The final settlement awarded Judge Garrett $325,000, along with sweeping reforms: mandatory bias training, a public database tracking stops by race, an early warning system for officers with disparities, quarterly audits, updated policies on suspicious person calls, and a civilian oversight board. The settlement also required Caldwell to personally pay $25,000 and mandated that CMPD use Judge Garrett's body camera footage as required training material. Officer Ethan Caldwell resigned before the settlement was finalized. He was barred from future law enforcement work in North Carolina, marked as not eligible for rehire. But that wasn't the end. Judge Garrett donated $250,000 of the settlement to create a legal defense fund for black residents who couldn't afford attorneys when their rights were violated. She kept the remainder for her daughter's college savings and took her family on a long overdue vacation. The body camera footage went viral 2 weeks after the settlement. Within 3 days, it surpassed 15 million views. The comments filled with shared experiences and new realizations. Viewers were stunned by Caldwell's "maybe it does" remark, a casual admission that he knew exactly what he was doing. The phrase became a hashtag. It became shorthand for the everyday racism black Americans endure. The video became mandatory training in police academies across 23 states. The sessions focused heavily on the "maybe it does" moment, teaching officers about implicit bias and what not to say, think, or do. Do you believe Judge Garrett should have endured years of incidents before taking legal action? Share your thoughts in the comments. Judge Garrett gave only 3 interviews about the case. One to a local Charlotte news outlet, where she calmly explained what happened and why it mattered. One to NPR, where she discussed the broader pattern of living while black, faced by professional black Americans. And one to a legal podcast for law students, where she explored the intersection of race, class, and constitutional rights. In each appearance, she was composed and measured. She showed no visible anger, though viewers understood it had been earned over years of being treated as suspicious in her own life. She didn't attack Caldwell personally, but she made clear his behavior was unacceptable. And in the NPR interview, she said something that went viral all on its own. "I shouldn't have to be a judge for my rights to count. I shouldn't have to cite Supreme Court rulings just to be left alone on my own front porch. The Constitution belongs to everyone, not only people with law degrees and 6-figure incomes. The fact that I had to rely on my title, my education, and my resources to get justice only shows how hard it is for people who don't have those advantages." That statement was shared hundreds of thousands of times. It appeared on protest posters. It was quoted in academic studies on racial profiling. It became a rallying call for criminal justice reform. The neighbors who had called the police moved away 6 months after the incident. They never offered an apology. Margaret, the neighbor who saw everything happen, became one of Judge Garrett's closest friends and organized a community meeting focused on racial profiling. CMPD carried out every reform required by the settlement. The public stop data database became a strong accountability tool. The early warning system flagged 14 officers in its first year who showed patterns similar to Caldwell's. All 14 were ordered to complete additional training. The Civilian Review Board reviewed 127 complaints in its first year and found merit in 43 of them. Judge Garrett continued serving on the bench with the same fairness and discipline she had always demonstrated. Officers appearing in her courtroom knew who she was, knew what had happened to her, and understood that she had zero tolerance for constitutional violations. 3 years later, Judge Garrett was invited to speak at a national conference on racial justice and policing. She stood before 2,000 people and shared her experience. Then she said something that brought the entire room to its feet. Every black person in America has a story like mine. Every single one. We've been followed in stores, stopped in cars, questioned in our neighborhoods, treated like suspects until we prove otherwise. The difference is that I had the knowledge, the resources, and the position to fight back. Most people don't. The Constitution protects everyone, not just people like me who can afford to sue. We must build systems that protect everyone, especially those who can't protect themselves. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Back in Charlotte, the impact continued. Suspicious person calls in wealthy neighborhoods dropped by 40% within 2 years of the settlement. The Ring doorbell clip of the neighbor saying, "Not in this neighborhood," became part of CMPD's implicit bias training. Officer Caldwell never returned to law enforcement. He relocated to another state and took a job in private security. He tells others he was pushed out for political reasons. He never admits that he violated someone's constitutional rights. Some believe the punishment was too severe. A career ended. $325,000 paid out over 11 minutes. But others knew it wasn't about 11 minutes. It was about 87 stops with an 82% bias rate. It was about a system that allowed that pattern to continue for years without intervention. The legal defense fund Judge Garrett created has helped 47 people in 3 years. People who were stopped without cause, searched without consent, or arrested without probable cause. People who deserve justice just like anyone else. Every case sent a message. Your rights matter even if you're not a judge. Even if you can't quote Supreme Court decisions, your rights still matter because you are a human being protected by the Constitution. That Thursday evening at 6:47 p.m., Officer Caldwell believed he was answering a routine call. He thought his badge gave him the power to demand answers from anyone he chose. He was wrong. What unfolded instead became a lesson in constitutional law, racial profiling, and the power of knowing your rights. A lesson that ended his career and forced lasting change in how an entire police department operated. Judge Simone Garrett never planned to become a symbol of police reform. She simply wanted to go inside her home after a workout. But when someone wearing a badge decided she had to prove she belonged there, she made a decision. She could have shown her ID. It would have been quicker, easier. But she knew from experience that showing ID was never the end. It was agreeing to a system where black people are required to prove themselves in ways white people never are, so she said no. She asserted her rights, she held her ground, and she made sure that moment mattered. Not only for herself, but for the 47 people her legal defense fund supported. For the hundreds of officers who later watched her body camera footage during training. For the millions who viewed it online and finally learned what reasonable suspicion really means. One woman, one porch, 11 minutes. And a police department forced to fundamentally change how it operated. That is the power of knowing your rights. That is why refusing to accept injustice matters, even when compliance would be easier. That is what happens when someone stands up not just for themselves, but for everyone who comes after. If this story taught you something or inspired you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about people standing up for what's right. Your support truly matters. Leave a comment and tell us what stayed with you most. Thank you for watching all the way to the end.